Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Big Rican on Sports podcast. I am your host, I am the Big Rican, and today is Sunday, June the 14th, 2020. And as I said last week, and you can tell from the outfit, today's episode is very much about my New York Mets and something I've been reading about the last few weeks, and that is MLB.com has been doing a fans vote, and the writers for MLB for each team pick the all-time team. So it got me thinking, what would my 25-man roster over the 58 years of the New York Mets, what would it look like? As you can see, I'm a pretty big fan, as I boast the Mr. Met batting practice hat from the 2015 World Series, my home white and blue pinstripe jersey, and of course the t-shirt I wear, which is in ode to the newest New York Met phenomenon, and that is the 2019 National League Rookie of the Year, the man who now holds the Major League record for most home runs ever by a rookie, the polar bear himself, Pete Alonso. Behind me, as I've been trying to put up some of my stuff that I have for each of the teams so you know who the episode's about, you see two of the alternate jerseys. The blue home alternate, which the Mets have worn for the last few years, and of course the black home alternate from the Mike Piazza beginning of the David Wright, Jose Reyes eras. A jersey John Franco wore a lot too. Funny I mention those names, because you're going to hear them in a couple of minutes. So before I get into the Mets 25-man roster, I just want to weigh in on the most recent development between Major League Baseball and the Players Association. And I have this to say. For every person who is going to hammer the players about this, it is time to look in the other direction. This is not about money anymore. This is about owners not wanting to do what is in the fans' best interest. The players have given the owners options of 114 and 80-plus games played in a season with extra teams in the playoffs, universal DH. It's all been talked about. And the owners have been the ones to say, yeah, no, you're going to make too much money and we're going to lose too much, so guess what? Taking that stance, I don't believe this will be baseball's death knell like I thought it would be if the players were going to be punks about how much money they were earning. I think the owners are going to get a wake-up call. Because guess what? If you put a product on the field, the fans are going to watch. What they're not going to do is spend oodles of money, like apparently I did, on merchandise and everything else, which is how you help pay salary. And guess what? When you own a business, you have to pay the salary of the people who work for your business. This one's on the owners, guys. This is not on the players. I'll be the first one to tell you, Major League Baseball players make way too much money in comparison to people who actually have important jobs in the world. This one is not on the players. So, as I said at the beginning, I really dug in, and a lot of the Mets stuff I know off the top of my head, just because I'm a lunatic fan, like so many others in the world. But I really thought about this, and I put together what I believe would be the best starting rotation, the best bullpen, and the best lineup with the best bench. Not only did I go there, I actually filled out a coaching staff. Manager, first base, second base, third base, the whole 9 yards. So we're going to get to that now. And in their 58 years of history, the New York Mets have been led by their pitching, and this is no different. So I'm going to give you the players. I'm going to say a little something about each one. And then I want to hear your opinion at the end on what everybody thinks, how I did with these guys. So we'll start at the top with the starting pitchers. And the first one is pretty easy. The man is called the franchise for a reason. 311 wins. The highest vote-in percentage in the Hall of Fame up until Ken Griffey Jr. in 2016. And as Howie Rose introduces him or his family at everything I've ever seen, the Mets' all-time leader in wins, strikeouts, and shutouts. And that is none other than George Thomas Seaver. Tom Seaver himself will be the ace of this staff. And when I go through the next four, these are 5 legitimate aces in my opinion, and the 5th one's going to shock some people. So I go to number 2. Maybe the greatest single season or 2-year arc in the history of the New York Mets until 2018 and 2019. And that is, of course, the number 5 overall pick in the 1982 Major League Baseball first-year player draft, the doctor himself, Dwight Gooden, who set the record in 1984 for most strikeouts in a single season by a rookie, breaking the record of longtime Cleveland Indians broadcaster and one-time phenom Herb Score over 30 years ago. Gooden parlayed a 1984 where he was the Rookie of the Year, struck out the side in the All-Star game, into a 1985 for the ages. 24-4 and a sub-2 ERA. Post Bob Gibson in the higher mound in 68, it is maybe the best season we've ever seen from a pitcher, and he was 20 years old. We know what happened to Doc later on, but of course he goes on to pitch the no-hitter for the Yankees. He wins 3 World Series, including an 86 championship with the Mets. And I have 3 pictures of Dwight Gooden on my wall right in front of me here. Dwight Gooden slides into the number 2 spot. The number 3 spot actually goes to our first left-handed pitcher on the staff, because there are 2. I don't like all right-handed staffs. I'm a purist. I need lefties and righties. And this man, actually, this past weekend, was supposed to have his number retired and be the 3rd player to ever have his number retired by the New York Mets for a player who played for the Mets. Of course, Seaver's 41 and Piazza's 31 hang in the rafters in Citi Field, to be joined by number 5, I hope, very, very soon. But Jerry Koosman, the number 36, is the number 3 starter on this staff. Koosman was a lockdown, shutdown postseason pitcher in his 2 runs with the Mets in 69 and 73. Of course, he pitched a complete game to win the 1969 World Series in Game 5, getting Davey Johnson to fly out to Cleon Jones. And what is not talked about more is his 1-run victory in game number 2 and carrying a no-hitter into the 7th inning. He was lights out. He won another game in the 1973 World Series. The guy was just clutch on a Met team that was built on pitching and timely hitting. My 4th starter is back to the right-hand side, and it is the newest member of what I consider the great starting pitchers of the New York Mets, and that is the back-to-back Cy Young Award winner in Jacob deGrom. Let's put this in context. What Jacob deGrom has done in 2 seasons is win a Cy Young Award with as many wins as Dwight Gooden had in 1985. In 2 seasons. Not only did he win 2 consecutive Cy Young Awards, they were jokes. He got 29 out of 30 first-place votes both years. Jack O'Conlon, who is the recording secretary of the Baseball Writers Association of America, he actually said on MLB Network, when they said, Jack, who's the National League Cy Young Award winner for 2019? And he goes, well, it's the same as last year. deGrom made a mockery of the Major Leagues the last 2 years. But that's not the one I want to talk about. Let's talk about his 3 starts in 2015 in the postseason, when he set the all-time Met record for strikeouts in Game 1 of the 2015 NLDS, beating Clayton Kershaw in L.A. Game 5, when he didn't have it, gutting through 6 innings, keeping the Mets in the game for Syndergaard and Familia to slam the door. And then we talk about his start in the NLCS against the Cubs. A phenomenal, phenomenal start where he, again, didn't really have his best stuff, but went on to get a W in a big game for the Mets that would propel them to their most recent pennant. So 1 through 4, it's pretty solid. This will be the surprise. In the number 5 spot, I have maybe the biggest warrior to ever put on a Met uniform, and that is a man I saw pitch a 3-hit shutout in Game 161 in 2008 at Shea Stadium the day before they closed it. That's right. Nohan himself, Johan Santana, rounds out the Mets starting rotation I have for my all-time top 25-man roster. Beyond that game, if Santana would have had any help in 2008, he not only would have won a Cy Young in the National League in his first year, I believe Santana would have been in the conversation for the MVP in 2008. He was the ace the Mets badly needed after Pedro was injured a lot of his time after 2005. But then we go back to June 1st of 2012. We just passed the 8-year anniversary of the first and still only no-hitter in New York Mets history. As a Met fan, I have been blessed to have 2 men call games now that are Met fans from day one, in Howie Rose and, of course, Gary Cohen. Howie on the radio, Gary on TV with Keith Hernandez and Ron Darling. To hear Howie Rose and Gary Cohen call the final out of that game, as a lifelong Met fan, it brought tears to my eyes. To hear Howie Rose say, in the 8,020th game in the history of the New York Mets, they finally have a no-hitter. To hear Gary Cohen go, it has happened. In their 51st season, Johan Santana has thrown the first no-hitter in the history of the New York Mets. By my account, he's on this list for a reason. So I just spent the first almost 10 minutes talking about the starting rotation because that's what the Mets have been defined by. But now I'm going to get into the bullpen, where they have also been very, very lucky. Although last year's record really wouldn't tell you they were very, very lucky in the bullpen. But we're going to start with the long man. And that is an actual starting pitcher I toyed with having in the number 5 spot. And that is Ron Darling. Yes, that Ron Darling, who not only just does Shallow Hal and call games on TBS and SNY, Ron Darling won 99 games in a New York Met uniform. Has always joked he wanted to go back and win his 100th. But Darling was Darling was Koosman to Gooden Seaver in the 80s. Brought over in the early 80s in a trade for Lee Mazzilli with the Texas Rangers, with Walt Terrell, who then got them a guy who's also on this team in Howard Johnson. Was a solid number 2. He was not overpowering. He was a sinker slider guy, mostly split finger fastball now that I think about it. Of course, Darling's big moments with the New York Mets were his 2 stellar starts in the 1986 World Series in games 1 and 4. 1, he gets a tough luck loss, and game 4, of course, he wins in his hometown in Boston. The second person in the bullpen, and I'm not naming a closer, I'm not doing that, Darling is a long man as a starter. The second one is the guy who holds the record for the most saves in a single season in New York Mets history, and that is Jeurys Familia. Now, for everybody who's going to argue with me on this, think about this. This is the guy who, without him, we don't get to the 2015 World Series. This is the guy who, without him, we don't get to the 2016 National League wildcard game. Familia, yes, has had some downtime since, but he is still a clutch pitcher who I believe will bring us a lot of fun in the future. The third, fourth, and fifth members of the Met bullpen on this team are 3 of the best lefties to ever do it in a bullpen. Let's start from the older member of this group, and that is Tug McGraw, the man who gave us You Gotta Believe in the middle of an ownership meeting. He also gave us Tim McGraw, too, but I'm not going to go there. Tugger was a member of both the 69 championship team and the 73 pennant-winning team, but he was as dominant as any closer of the time, and I'm including Fingers and Gossage in that, down the stretch in that 1973 season with a sub-2 ERA and something like 15 or 16 saves, back in the day when saves were more than an inning. So he's one of them. The next one is the man whose glove has not landed yet, and that is, of course, Jesse Orosco, who became the first pitcher in Major League history to win 3 games in relief in the same league championship series, winning games 3, 5, and 6 in 1986 against Houston. Also, of course, getting the final out of the 86 World Series, striking out Marty Barrett, and watching that glove go in the air, and then the dog pile started. But Orosco was also a long-tenured Met. He was actually traded for Jerry Koosman, coming over from Minnesota in the 70s, and he made his Major League debut in 1979. He spent 80 in the Bush Leagues, and then he went back up in 81. It was with the Mets through the end of the 87 season, and then I think he's still pitching today. That man is so old doing it. But no, in all seriousness, Orosco pitched a long time. He actually had a cup of coffee with the Mets in 2000 before being traded to St. Louis for Joe McEwing. The third and final member of this trio or triumvirate of lefties in this Mets bullpen is the Major League leader in saves for a left-handed pitcher. He is one of the longest tenured Mets in history, and he was the 3rd captain in New York Mets history, and that is John Franco. Born in Brooklyn, spent 15 of his, I think, 19 Major League seasons in New York. As the story goes, it was around Christmas 1989. The Reds had called him, I believe it was Christmas Eve, and said, John, you've been traded. They told him where he was going. Franco walked out in the living room. They said, "What's wrong?" He said, "I just got traded." And they said, "Where?" And he smiled and said, "To the Mets." Franco holds the all-time record for saves in a Met uniform with 276, 422 overall. Should be in the Hall of Fame, in my opinion. He's the all-time leader in something. There aren't many all-time leaders in anything not named Pete Rose or Barry Bonds that aren't in the Hall of Fame. So I close out with two more righties, and I'm going to go with Jesse Orosco's running mate, the lunatic himself, Roger McDowell. Now, McDowell may have been known for stealing the ATV of the Phillie Phanatic. He may be the greatest hot foot giver in the history of Major League Baseball, but Roger McDowell was one of the biggest big game pitchers the New York Mets have ever had. What gets lost in a subpar World Series performance is the fact that in that epic Game 6 against Houston in 1986, Roger McDowell pitched 5 shutout innings to keep the Mets in that game and keep a shot at the World Series, and most importantly, a shot at missing Mike Scott for a third time right on the table. Finally, I close with the guy who was the closer in 2000, the second most recent time the Mets went to the World Series, and that is Armando Benitez. People ask me why. Why Armando? Because for the 2 years in a Met uniform, really 2.5, halfway through 99, he took the job over from John Franco. Of course, all of 2000, all of 2001, Benitez was as lights out as it gets and was a phenomenal, phenomenal closer. He held the record until Familia broke it. So that rounds out the Met bullpen. Now I'm going to get to the position players, and I'm going to start with the starting lineup. And I made this starting lineup just kind of how I would put one together in my head. And as I said, I'm going to say a little something about each guy. Leading off is one of the greatest homegrown players the New York Mets have ever produced. The shortstop, Jose Reyes, who leads the team in triples and stolen bases all time. He is the only Met to ever win a batting title. He did that in his final season in 2011. Of course, Reyes then went to Miami, to Toronto, a tumultuous time in Colorado, and then Met fans got what they wanted when Jose Reyes was brought back in after the David Wright injury in 2016. Now, we didn't get to see, other than the one game in David's final game, what we had wanted to see for 15 years or so, and that is Reyes and Wright on the left side of the infield. Jose Reyes, at the end of the day, may be one of the best leadoff men of this generation. In his second full season, he stole 50 bases, and in 2006, he stole 77 bags. An amazing year, especially now when you don't run, when you're hitting more home runs than anything. So Reyes leads off pretty easy. The second place hitter is the second baseman, the guy who holds the record for most home runs and RBIs as a second baseman with the New York Mets, and that is Edgardo Alfonso. An all-star, a member of the 2000 pennant-winning club, and maybe one of the best clutch hitters the New York Mets have ever had. He was a coach in the Mets system, and he's still around Citi Field today. Fonzie was part of that greatest infield ever of Olerud, Alfonso, Ray Ordonez, and Robin Ventura. Batting third, there's only one answer. It is the only answer that any Met fan will give, and that is very simply Keith Hernandez. I hold a special kinship to Keith Hernandez because him and my father look alike. And in all seriousness, you are talking about the greatest defensive first baseman to ever play the game. It's not even a dispute or a debate. Wes Parker, who was on the all-time Rawlings team, I don't think so. It's Keith Hernandez. No one charged a bunt. No one played balls in the dirt or played the line better than Keith Hernandez. The first captain in New York Mets history, a part of the two trades that you will remember where you were when they happened, and the dates, on the good side that is. June 15th, 1983, Rick Ownby and Neil Allen go to the St. Louis Cardinals for Keith Hernandez, and starting from the day he got there, the Mets were the most dominant team in the National League until the day he left. Plain and simple. The fourth place hitter is only the second Hall of Famer in New York Mets history. That is the greatest hitting catcher of all time, number 31, Mike Piazza. Piazza is fondly remembered for the September 21st home run in 2001. Um, I remember where I was that day, and he is the answer to the second trade. May 22nd, 1998, Preston Wilson, Eddie Arnold, Jeff Getz to the Florida Marlins, for Mike Piazza. So Piazza bats fourth, and when you think about it, the Mets have been very blessed at catcher. Jerry Grody, maybe one of the better defensive catchers of all time. Of course, Gary Carter and Mike Piazza. I have Piazza on this team. Batting fifth and playing right field is the number one overall pick from the 1980 Major League Baseball first-year player draft. The man who still to this day, because of David Wright's injuries, holds the record for most home runs as a New York Met, and that is Darryl Strawberry. Funny side note, I met Darryl in 1988 in Kingston, New York, close to where I live, at the Holiday Inn. And I'll tell you what, he was larger than life then. I've seen stuff of him on TV recently. He's still larger than life. Darryl Strawberry was 6'6" with that big leg kick, and he hit the baseball a country mile every time he made good contact. Two thoughts of Strawberry. One is a ball he hit when I was there as a kid, and it landed on the stairs for the subway. Over the fence, the bullpen fence, in the parking lot. The other one is, of course, opening day 1988 in Montreal when he hit the roof of Olympic Stadium. That's not a typo, and that's not misspeaking. He hit the roof. An absolute missile. The sixth place hitter is the center fielder. Maybe the greatest free agent acquisition the Mets have ever had, and that is Carlos Beltran. Now, his tenure as a manager, of course, never got off the ground because of the issues with the Houston Astros and the cheating, but Carlos Beltran as a Mets player was a revelation. Multi-time Gold Glover. He hit for power, average. He ran. He played better defense than any center fielder I think I've seen in person, and I saw him a couple of times. Beltran was everything he was advertised to be except for the 2005 season, for all the years he was with the Mets. His trade in 2011, or 2010, 2010, brought us Zach Wheeler. So, listen, Beltran is the center fielder. I had a lot of other choices. I had Tommy Agee, I had Mookie, but nobody had the impact that Beltran did. The left fielder batting seventh, and I changed the order in the batting order that I had printed out, is Cleon Jones. Maybe the best average hitter the Mets have ever produced from their farm system. He also is most famous for catching the final out of the 1969 World Series and genuflecting down. What many people don't remember is the shoe polish play. When he got hit in the foot by a pitch, Gil Hodges comes out, shows him the shoe polish. Cleon Jones gets on first. Don Clendenin hits a two-run homer to make it 3-2. Batting eighth, and in real life he wouldn't bat here, but it's the third baseman. And again, there's only one answer. And that is the fourth captain in New York Mets history, David Allen Wright. I will remind the listening audience for a final time, because we are coming upon July 1st very quickly. Bobby Bonilla had his contract redone to be released and pay him later in life. With the money the Mets saved, they made a trade to bring in Mike Hampton and Mike Hampton and Derek Bell from the Houston Astros for the 2000 season, which netted them the fourth pennant in franchise history. When Mike Hampton left, the Mets were given a compensatory pick in the 2001 Major League Baseball first-year player draft, and they took the captain. So thank you, Bobby Bonilla. I am tired of hearing crap. He is the Mets' all-time leader in hits, RBIs, on-base percentage, walks, WAR. Just go. And it's all David Wright with few exceptions. He would have broken the Mets' all-time home run record had he not been injured. You want to talk about moments? We talk about the first home run, or the home run on the third pitch after he came back from spinal stenosis in 2015. We talk about the home run he hit in the World Series, which I still say to this day, anybody else hits that home run, the crowd goes crazy. We were a little louder because it was the captain. So now we get to the bench players, and here I tried to fill in a bench that would be functional for an actual team to use. So on my bench, my backup catcher is the other Hall of Famer that has gone behind the plate for the New York Mets, and that's Gary Carter, the kid who left us far too soon, um, just before the 2012 season. Um, what's there to say about the kid? He started the rally to win Game 6. I don't believe the Mets win a World Series without Gary Carter, although a lot of the players will tell you they don't win a World Series without Keith Hernandez. The next guy is he's number one in your scorebooks and number one in your hearts, and he's the man who inspires Met fans to moo, and that is William Hayward Mookie Wilson, the only Met to suit up for the entire decade of the 80s, making his debut in 1980 and leaving the team partway through the season in 1989 to the Toronto Blue Jays for a pitcher named Jeff Musselman. This is where I'm at. I remember who Mookie Wilson was traded for. The next guy is one of 3 third basemen in the history of Major League Baseball to be a 30-30 player, to go with David Wright in 2007 and Jose Ramirez from the Cleveland Indians in 2018, and that is none other than Hojo, Howard Johnson. What's there to say about Howard Johnson? A switch hitter with power and speed. He played not only third base, but he played some shortstop for the Mets too in 1990. He was a phenomenal grab sent after the Mets sent Walt Terrell to the Detroit Tigers to acquire him before the 1985 season. The next 2 are more modern Mets, and I'm going to add a caveat. I'm going to do a 26th man on this roster like they would have done this year. The 24th man on the roster is Yoenis Cespedes. Now, before everybody jumps on my back, oh, he hasn't done anything. Without Yoenis Cespedes, the New York Mets do not win the 2015 pennant. Plain and simple. He is why they won the pennant, and his insane production for the year and a half he was healthy is why Cespedes is still with the Mets now. His 2016 was awesome. His 2015 from August 1st on was insanity. He hit 17 dingers in a month and a half. He hit a couple in the playoffs. One that would have broken somebody if it would have hit him. His World Series wasn't up to snuff, but nobody on the Mets was up to snuff in the World Series except for maybe Matt Harvey and Michael Conforto. Oh, and Granderson. But Cespedes is on the bottom of that list. The other one is my true defensive pick, and that is the second Gold Glover in center field for the New York Mets, and that is Juan Lagares. This is a hard pick. I loved Lagares when he was here because he's no longer with the team. I love his glove. I love he was fast. He made some plays that I never thought could be made. And I'm watching this guy and I'm going, oh, this is phenomenal. I personally think that Cespedes coming over and the emergence of Michael Conforto is what killed Lagares with the Mets organization because he didn't get to play much. And finally, my 26th player. It's the man we all mourned and cried over on opening day in 2018, and that is Legrand Orange himself, Rusty Staub. Maybe the greatest pinch hitter in baseball history. He is 9th on baseball's all-time most games played list. Listen, Rusty was the first Met to have over 100 RBIs. He was the cornerstone of the offense of that 1973 pennant win, even though Tug running his mouth is what got him there. So I felt I had to add a 26th player, and it had to be Rusty Staub. So the man to lead this team is the man who won the team's second championship and the man who flew out to end the World Series during the team's first championship, and that is Davey Johnson. As an in-game tactician, Johnson was pretty good. Again, I was 7, 8, 9 years old when he was still a Met manager, but watching those teams, there weren't a lot of buttons Davey pushed that didn't work, except the Greg Jeffries button. That was a pretty bad one. But outside of that, Davey was phenomenal. In 1983, the Mets were a last-place team, and in 84, they challenged the Cubs right to the end of the season, which had Frank Cashen go out and get Gary Carter, which led to a 98-win season in 85 and a 108-win season in a World Series in 1986. Davey Johnson never finished lower than second place as the manager of the Mets. Never. And he took a 90-loss team and made him an almost 90-win team. Then he went 98. Then he won 108. I think they won 90 games in 87, and then they won 100 games again in 1988. So Davey leads the team. His bench coach is, of course, the man who led them to their first world championship, a guy who should be elected by the Veterans Committee, or whatever they're called now, to the Baseball Hall of Fame for his playing days, and that is Gil Hodges. Gil Hodges was the quiet, reserved, really gentle giant that the Mets needed so badly. They traded the Washington Senators a player for him. Gil's the bench coach. The pitching coach is Mel Stottlemyre, of course, who was at the helm of those great rotations in the 80s and those young arms that just were explosive. Beyond that, he turned a middle-of-the-road left-handed pitcher in Bobby Ojeda into an 18-game winner. Sid Fernandez was another project of his that was great. He coached, of course, with the Yankees as well, but Mel got his first ring as a coach with the New York Mets. The first base coach is the first base coach from those 1969 champions and the manager of the 1973 champions, Yogi Berra. Listen, if he's talking about it ain't over till it's over, remember, the 73 Mets were 83-79. They were terrible the first half of the year, but he kept with it, and they won a pennant. And they almost beat the Oakland A's in the World Series. I still think they should have won that series, but they didn't, and it was 30-some years ago. 40-some years ago. 40-some years ago, yeah. And finally, the third base coach is the only man to ever be in uniform for both titles that the New York Mets have won, and that is Buddy Harrelson, the shortstop on the 1969 World Championship team and the 1973 pennant winners, and of course the third base coach for the 86 Mets. True story. Lenny Dykstra ends Game 3 of the World Series on a home run. 9 months to the day, Buddy has a child. You should thank Lenny Dykstra. So just from top to bottom, again, the pitchers, Seaver, Gooden, Koosman, DeGrom, and Santana make out the starting rotation. Darling, Familia, Tug McGraw, John Franco, Jesse Orosco, Armando Benitez, and Roger McDowell take care of the bullpen. Reyes, Alfonso, Hernandez, Piazza, Strawberry, Beltran, Cleon Jones, David Wright are the 8 starting fielders. Of course, Gary Carter, Mookie Wilson, Howard Johnson, Cespedes, Lagares, and Rusty on the bench. Listen, in 58 years, the Mets have had a lot of great players come through. Ricky Henderson, Willie Mays, Oral Hershiser, Al Leiter, John Matlack, Dr. Ron Taylor. The list goes on. Had a lot of great moments, from the Grand Slam single of Robin Ventura in 1999 to the complete game shutout of the St. Louis Cardinals in Game 5 of the 2000 NLCS by Mike Hampton, to, of course, the 69 run, the 86 Magic. The Mets have had it left, right, and center for 58 years. I'm hoping 59 will actually be played. So I want to do something different this week, and my buddies at TimeSkew are going to help me out. And I meant to say this. Big Rican on Sports is a proud member of the TimeSkew podcast family. Sorry, guys, I missed it. I was jumping into the Mets. I want to do a Q&A show, so anybody listening or reading tweets or what have you, give me your questions about Major League Baseball, college football, the NFL, and the NBA. I would love to go through and answer questions this next upcoming episode, which I'm going to do next Sunday. As always, Big Rican can be found on Google, Spotify, Anchor, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, and as I said a minute ago, we are a new proud member of the TimeSkew Podcast Network. You can find us on timeskew.com/podcast. We can be found on Instagram, on Twitter at Big Rican on Sport. Instagram is at Big Rican on Sports. Big Rican on Sport on YouTube, where if you're watching it here, and Big Rican on Sports on Facebook. So hopefully get your questions in. I'd love to do a Q&A for next week. Any topic on the 4 majors, and if you want to go outside of that, if you want to get specific to my teams or even your own, in my opinion of it, go right ahead. We will talk to you guys in a week. Have a good one.